Welcome everybody to episode 4 of Believers and Non-Believers in Discussion. This week we are discussing the supernatural. Up to now we've been doing religious subjects. I am covering the concept of belief in general, so that really goes beyond the topic of religion, and you're going to see that today. From my right to the left, let me introduce Peaches Vetch. I got that? Beach. You got the spelling. She's a paranormal investigator. Gary Shook, who is a Wiccan elder. Adrian Berrigan, UCR student and member of the Secular Student Alliance. And Michael Kane, he's a member of the Center for Inquiry and the host of the Free Religion podcast. So suggest looking that up and giving that a listen. So I'm going to start on the right here with Peaches. Since you and Gary are not of mainstream religion, let's start with you giving us a little just description of what you do, and then we'll go into commentary on the subject of the supernatural itself. Kind of tell us what you do. Bring the mic in closer too, if you could.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Kind of tell us what you do, and we'll go from there.
Okay. I am a paranormal investigator. It's something that I've been into for decades. I finally decided to join a group about 10 years ago and have been investigating pretty actively since then. So, people ask me why I've been interested in it, and I've had a lot of experiences, a lot that could later be explained, but then a lot that couldn't. So we constantly seek out answers as to why certain things happen without using certain beliefs that others would. Our group mainly focuses on home investigations. So we do a lot of, people contact us and say they've got issues at home, if we can help them. We also do a lot of the fun stuff by going to locations that you see on some of the TV shows, the reality shows. So we've traveled the U.S. quite extensively, and we've done hundreds of investigations in all different types of places. So.
Okay. And Gary?
I've been in the craft for 30 years. My main focus is in teaching. Every year for the past 30 years, I've taught a beginning and an advanced Wicca class. I have one starting next weekend. I founded the Ecclesian tradition, which is a tradition. It's similar to a denomination of a Christian religion. It's still very active and has several hundred initiates. I founded Touchstone Local Council, which is the local Council for Covenant of the Goddess, which is a national organization to protect Wiccan religious freedoms and rights. That pretty much sums it up.
Can you clarify the link between Christianity? I'm not quite sure I understand that. You say it's based on Christian origin?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's Ecclesian. That's the term I used.
Okay, I misunderstood. Okay, and you guys, we know who you are. So
yeah.
So well then we'll start on your side for getting right into the subject of the supernatural. This is unprompted in the sense that I'm not going to tell you what to say or what to talk about. So you're free to take a few minutes here and give us your feelings on the subject.
All right. So I think generally speaking on the topic of supernatural phenomenon in general, I tend to err on the side of if something interacts with nature and is testable, is something we can falsifiably demonstrate, then it is not supernatural, it is natural. Sort of the alternative medicine claims, things that work in alternative medicine are called medicine. So I think in the same aspect of doing scientific research, it's either a naturalistic claim or it's not. If it's non-naturalistic claim and it's something that can't be verified, tested, or falsified, then it's something that's just up for personal opinion. That's sort of my general overall view. My history is in a very traditional Christian family, grew up through the Nazarene and Baptist families. So I've got a lot of that history with that side of the supernatural phenomenons from a biblical point of view. Got into a lot of the spiritualism and things throughout high school, dove a little bit into some of the Wiccan and more naturalistic types of, religions or philosophies, and just kind of found them all lacking when really put to actual tests and scrutiny.
Okay, we'll get back to that question of lacking. Adrian?
I've always been kind of a skeptical person. I was raised in the Catholic religion. Come from a fairly traditional Mexican household that had kind of a lot of weird beliefs going on. On the one hand, especially my grandparents were very, what you would say, very traditional, very anti anything that wasn't Catholic. So I had they had this contradicting philosophy, I guess, where they rejected all kinds of other religions and spiritual claims, yet because they thought, that Catholicism was the only true spiritual path. But at the same time, they would fear things that they perceived as satanic, or kind of like, I'm sure they would consider like a Wiccan perspective. They were afraid of what are they called? Ouija boards. Somehow, like they had this thing where they didn't believe in the power of Ouija boards, but at the same time they thought it was the devil and that it would ruin you somehow. So when I grew up with these kind of contradicting perspectives, it really made me just question everything I was told. I've had a family that claims to have had paranormal encounters, which later could have been explained with sleep paralysis, or they were out hunting in the woods and they got scared by something that sounded like a woman, which might have been an owl, things like that. So when I was little, I definitely was afraid of ghosts. I believed in demons and when I grew up, I really had no reason to continue holding on to those beliefs, and that's basically how I got to the position that I am now.
Okay, and Gary?
Do you want me to do the opening remarks?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I've scripted mine, and I should come in under 5 minutes, which I'm allotted.
It's fine. We're a little casual here.
When I was contacted about participation in this panel, my first response was, this is very interesting, but the supernatural might not be the right topic for me. Wiccans are not a monolithic block. Rather, one of the strengths of our religion is its diversity. Beyond some core values, it's a difficult task to describe what a Wiccan believes. The best way I've found to describe Wiccans is the term Wiccans tend to be, and there's always exceptions to that description. I have taught the craft for close to 30 years, and the first thing I tell my students is to take what works for them from my classes and to leave behind what does not. Wicca is a religion like most others. It contains some core fundamentals and has an ethical framework. It is not to be confused with the many practices that Wiccans are accepting of and engage in. These would include magic, energy healing, divination, and many other things that would be considered supernatural. I myself freely admit to being a skeptic on a lot of things that can be put into the supernatural box. What I call pop culture paranormal just drives me up a wall. This includes TV shows like Ghost Hunters, Bigfoot, UFOs, crop circles, etc. When I wrote back to Phil, was that I would most likely be agreeing with the people sitting across the table from me as much as I disagreed with them. After thinking about the panel and topic, I came to the conclusion that much of what I practice in my religious path would be considered supernatural by many. I have no intention, or for that matter, the ability to offer a deep intellectual defense of anything said here tonight. What I can bring to this table is 30 years of direct personal experience. What I would like to do in my opening remarks is to share with you two of the most profound experiences I've had, which I can attach no rational explanation. The first happened to my mother when I was about 10 years old. You need to know two things about my mom. First, she was a skeptic about everything. She was not religious and thought anything supernatural was just a pack of lies. The second thing is that she was estranged from her family, having little or no contact with any of them. One night in the early morning hours, she awoke from sleep and sat up in bed. She saw one of her sisters standing at the foot of her bed. The next day, we received a phone call from another one of her sisters telling us that that sister had died at about the same time that she had appeared to my mother. I don't think my mother ever shared this with anyone besides myself. Last year, I attended PantheaCon, which is a 4-day pagan conference held in San Jose. I also had a bad knee, which would require surgery a couple of months after the conference. We were staying at a hotel a couple of blocks from the conference site, and the conference itself ran from early in the morning until after midnight, and there was a lot of walking involved. By the end of the first day, I was in agony, almost to the point of being unable to walk. That evening, I participated in a healing ritual led by one of the most respected Wiccan elders in the country. During the ritual, which must have had 200 participants, we were instructed if you wanted healing to create a second circle within the main circle. I did not join the inner circle, remaining as a spectator on the outside. The healing act that was done was to anoint each person with what they call the waters of the world, which was water that was drawn from many sacred wells around the world. During the healings, one of the people doing so left the inner circle and started anointing those on the outside. When she anointed me, it felt like a surge of energy rushed through my body, and the pain vanished instantly. I turned to the person I was with and started jumping up and down. She looked at me like I was crazy. I just said, my knee, the pain is gone. I could go on and on with examples such as these. Do these experiences prove anything? No, they don't, to anyone but myself. But that misses the point entirely. Whether or not there is an occult basis for things we experience, or whether they are explainable in some rational manner, is irrelevant. What is relevant is what these practices bring to my life and to the lives of other practitioners. Thank you.
Okay, I have to ask, how long did the pain relief last?
The entire weekend. I couldn't walk. I literally couldn't walk. And it was the instant she touched me, it was gone. It was like, I don't believe things until I experience them.
Yeah.
And I go, there was something to that.
So what happened on Monday?
I was still good on Monday. The pain, it didn't completely fix it. I still had to have the surgery. But I was good for the rest of the weekend.
So just for a definitions clarity for me, would you still consider that a healing?
It was a relief, and I would consider it a healing for that weekend. I had pain like somebody was sticking a knife under my kneecap. It was pretty bad. And just to have it like you throw a light switch and it's gone, and believe me or not believe me, but that's my experience.
Yeah, personal experience is one of the strongest motivators for belief in pretty much everything I've seen, studies and anecdotes like this. Peaches, can you give us
Personal experiences?
Well, no, just your feelings on the subject of the supernatural.
I too grew up in a Catholic household, but they weren't very strict as far as beliefs and that sort of thing. My family was actually very into the supernatural for generations. My grandmothers, my aunts would say that they experienced certain things. So that probably influenced why I was kind of into it as well. But I'd say I was 8 or 9 years old when I started getting a little bit more into it, wanted to record and see if I could catch, voices, because I'd see things on TV and want to do what they do. And so I've had a lot of personal experiences, which of course sways my opinion. But I'm also very skeptical. I don't believe everything that happens. I always look for some sort of explanation as to why, certain things happen. So, I don't just automatically jump to conclusions. And that's what's been really good about our investigative team, because, we don't do that. We try to find actual answers, like sleep paralysis and that sort of thing. It happens a lot. So, I think I'm just on my own personal journey for quest for answers for just about anything. But, I want to be able to test things and see if it actually, can be reproduced and that sort of thing. So, but some of my experiences that I've had, I haven't been able to explain them. So, it leaves me wondering.
Comments? Questions?
So Peaches, does your group, when you go out on your investigations, what exactly are you guys looking for? Do you guys try to focus specifically on what we would call like ghosts or other types of presences, like demonic entities, etc.?
We generally do ghost spirits. A lot of people have claimed they have demons or demonic activity. And we found that a lot of times the reasons they believe in that is because of their religious background. Mm-hmm. So, I tend to also ask them what their religious beliefs are, because that kind of gives me an indicator as to possibly why it's only demonic or why only something happens during a certain period of time. Also have to believe in demons, and I'm not sure if I do.
Okay.
When you're saying that you want to test things, and I appreciate that, that's fantastic, because I think a lot of people go in with that sort of I'm here to prove something versus I'm going to follow the evidence where it leads. What sort of methodological training do you guys go through to make sure that you're actually doing science and not just sort of doing the Ghost Hunter TV show? Like, what do you guys actually go through and learn forensics and site evaluation and that sort of technique, or is it really just kind of a more of a clubbish kind of, I don't mean that to sound condescending, but more of just a kind of we get together and we kind of do our thing?
We actually do try to test for things. A lot of times people say they hear scratching on the outside. We actually check the outside of the perimeter of the house to see if there's branches, things like that, entry points for rodents, that sort of thing. And we also actually ask a lot of questions in regards to their medical background and psychiatric background. So we do try to do that as well.
Weed that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to go with rather than ask you, does supernatural exist, we're going to go with an automatic yes on this side, correct?
I believe so.
Okay.
For me, yeah.
So, and that's based on the personal experience, it seems, correct? How do we know that this is, none of us, I'm assuming, know it, that there's a certain type of realm or dimension, right? Sort of definition that's that type. But how do you know that this is a real thing, as opposed to a confirmation bias that people are applying to what they want, especially when you come to talking to loved ones who died and things like this?
Wow. That's a little difficult. What a lot of times people say, because I can't find an explanation, it's got to be this or it's got to be that. And not always is it going to be the answer that's supernatural because we can't explain it. But, if you keep applying things that you learn later on in life and you still don't have an answer, I think we want to keep looking for an answer to something, especially if it's significant in your life. As far as, saying, yeah, it's absolute, I don't know if that's true either.
I'm going to throw the opposite question back this way, and I'll give it to Michael because you're writing. When somebody comes up with a personal story of something that you cannot explain, as a, say, a person with a science background or medical background. How do you react to that? I mean, you don't really.
I've had the same kind of experiences. I've absolutely had experiences I cannot explain. I don't know what happened. Something overcame me. I've had religious experiences in church, in the height of the singing and the dancing and the whole 9 yards. I mean, you have experiences. Absolutely. I don't think anybody here is lying when they say like, oh, I had that experience. I don't ever want to come across that way. I think people are often mistaken about the experience they had. And I think the methodology that you use to determine whether or not something actually occurred in your life is real or something you're applying to it is the important part of what you believe. So when people come to me and they say, oh, this thing happened, I'm like, great, could you do it again? And immediately that'd be my sort of first thing. It's like, well, how do we repeat this? Can we test this? Can we put this in a bubble and actually make this work over and over? And can we develop some sort of methodology for it to have occurred? When there's no methodology, there's no connection to sort of the natural world. That's when I kind of go, well, and here magic happens. And that's the part that's never been the actual answer, right? Anytime we've investigated anything thoroughly, magic has never actually been the answer. So anecdotes are anecdotes. The plural of anecdote is not evidence. And so I don't really rely on personal story a whole lot. I think they're important to the person who has them, but they're pretty irrelevant to the evidence to other people.
So, Adrian, have you run into people that have had personal experiences that are unexplained?
Yeah, all the time.
How do you deal with them in terms of they're 100% confident of their opinion of what happened and why it happened, perhaps?
So I think it's extremely important, as Michael said, to acknowledge that they truly believe that this experience happened in the way that they perceived it to, and I try to relate my own experiences with what they've had. So I'll give a personal anecdote of my own. When I was around 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old, I was obsessed with the movie Salem's Lot, like the 70s or 80s movie, right? Vampires. And there was a really scary vampire dude. He was like a 7 foot tall, blue, like vampire demon named Mr. Barlow. So I'd watch this movie all the time, and so I was terrified, but I would keep watching it because that's what little kids do. And so one night I'm lying in bed, and I'm looking towards my door, right? And I think I yawned or something, closed my eyes, and when I opened them, Mr. Barlow was literally standing in my doorway. And when I say this, I don't mean this that he was there in an ephemeral kind of way, in like a Scooby-Doo ghost kind of thing. He was as real to me as Phil is right now, completely solid. And what freaked me out was at first I thought I was dreaming.
How old were you?
10 probably,
10.
9, 10. But I had some posters on my wall, and the posters were only partially revealed, right? So I could only see the parts that his body weren't blocking, and so I was terrified. And if that had been a vision, I kind of like got over it a week later and wasn't sure what to make of it, kind of forgot about it. But if I had been a bit older, or if I had seen this experience of maybe like a religious figure or something like that my family had been discussing, like if my grandpa was telling me about my dead great-grandmother and I had seen her, right? I think it's very possible that I would have been liable to believe that this was a true paranormal experience. And so I tell this anecdote sometimes to make a point that, like, I've been fortunate enough to have never dealt with mental illness, so it's very possible for a completely sober, healthy mind to see things that truly aren't there. And so with that experience, looking back on that experience has taught me to kind of have a bit of compassion rather than condescension when people tell me those kinds of experiences. And so that's always the approach that I try to take with it.
Go ahead. You had a question?
Oh, no.
Don't let me ask all the questions, please. So you said you had this fear of ghosts, and this is part of the story. What age did that change for you, approximately?
Probably like, probably a year or two later, middle school, right before then.
What do you think induced that change? in perspective?
I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I started doubting my parents' religion. I mean, in Catholicism, like the Holy Ghost is a big deal. And like at that age, I didn't truly understand the Holy Ghost, so I literally thought it was kind of a ghost. So, I mean, that was all a little bit of a mistake on my part. But, yeah. So I've asked myself, like, maybe I was dreaming when I saw that ghost. But like I've had lucid dreams before. I've had sleep paralysis, and it was just completely different from those experiences. I could hear some cars rolling by outside. I lived right on the street corner, so there was always traffic going on.
So it was really kind of your own logical process that made you come to the conclusion that it was less likely a hallucination, for lack of a better word, than not.
Yeah, right.
Now, when you run into people all the time that would go in the opposite direction, do you find, or have you been able to tell if they tend to be religious, or if they tend not to be religious, or if they tend to be into other belief systems, alien abduction, anything unusual like that?
Yeah, a lot of them did have a religious background. Those were the ones that seemed to be extremely frightened by it. Because I know certain aspects of Christianity, they'll tell them, oh, if it's a spirit here on earth, then it's demonic because it's not supposed to be here. I have been told, that those parts of religion. So, half the time, yeah, they were extremely frightful of it. The others, a lot of times they had just seen a really scary movie. Around Halloween, when all the real scary, demonic type movies come out, then we get a slew of phone calls and emails, and
Really?
Yeah,
So bit of a trigger event.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So whenever we knew like a movie would come out, there'd be a surge in activity that people say they would experience, whether they are more open to it or it was just suggested to them. So yeah, we always braced ourselves for that.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you know of any studies that might have been done of groups of people that tend to believe in ghosts and things, if there's any demographic breakdown to it?
Demographic? Not that I'm aware that any studies have been done.
If you ever find anything, send it my way.
Yeah, that'd be really. I'd be really interested in that too.
So, guys have any questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just quick question. You mentioned like scary movies kind of cause an uptick in your investigations. What kind of effect did the paranormal activity movies have with you guys?
Besides good for business.
Well, yeah. People, when they'd email, they'd say, oh, well, I think it might be like this, like what's happening there. Especially, I think it was the second paranormal activity movie, that's the only one I think I've seen, where, the family tends to deny everything until it gets so big and then explodes, and then, all hell's breaking loose and whatnot. That seems to happen whenever something paranormal happens in a family. Everybody wants to deny it at first, and then, okay, maybe, but we're not going to talk about it. And then, well, maybe it happened. Maybe we should think about calling somebody. And then it just, gets bigger and bigger. And I don't know if it's because everybody starts to get a little more fearful, and now their senses are heightened, and then they just start freaking the hell out. It might just all explode, so, yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
My question was actually more for, would it be elder? Do you prefer to be called that, or Gary? Or
Gary's fine.
Okay, Gary's cool. All right, I want to be respectful. With where you fall, and you said you're really kind of not in the religion camp of the Wiccan component. But you do make reference to God and goddess and things of that nature. So
Yes, I do.
So do you feel that is a, I guess for lack of a non-Christian definition, is that like a transcendent type of God, like an active God that works in the world, like one that's connects with nature in an actual physical way, or is it a sort of first mover kind of thing?
I think everybody that's a Wiccan is going to have a slightly different perspective.
Okay.
But if I was going to put myself into a category, I'd be more of a monist. There's one original source of everything, and everything emanates from that, and everything is an integral part of the creative original source. And that kind of differentiates from monotheism in that, they have the ex nihilo theory where God created everything, and then there it is. It's not me. It's what I created out of stuff. My perspective is everything is creation. Everything is deity. We all are. We all encompass. We all have the God and Goddess within us. That we put handles on things so we can look at them, move them around. So we use the concept of God and Goddess so that the female is as important as the male. It's not the old guy with the beard sitting on the throne.
Sure. Little more Taoist, a little more yin-yang kind of.
A little bit.
Yeah, okay.
And I wouldn't agree with what you said that I'm not into the religious aspect. I'm absolutely into that.
Okay.
It's my point when my opening remarks was that not everybody's exactly the same within Wicca. That some people, the magic and the divination is integral parts of the religious practice, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay. Yeah, I was more thinking along the lines of, is it a dogmatic practice? So it sounds like it's a little more free-flowing than that.
I wouldn't consider it dogmatic.
Okay.
There are some basic tenets and principles that you really need to adhere to be considered Wiccan.
Sure.
But it all falls under the umbrella of witchcraft. And if you don't, if you're not defined as a Wiccan, then you're under the bigger umbrella.
Okay.
In the Bible, just to grab something to set a date, 2000 BC or so, further back if you want to go into the Old Testament, but Wiccan or witches are mentioned and stuff. How much of today's practice is really carried forward from historical practices?
Very little.
So how
Religions are based upon mythologies, and Wicca is no different. Wicca is a religion that started in the 1940s by a gentleman named Gerald Gardner, and he basically put it together. There was a lot of influences on how this all came together. There was predecessors to Gardner, but if you go by the Margaret Murray thesis that there was a existing witch cult that existed through the Burning Times and through medieval Europe, there's very little real evidence that that is true. It's the basic concepts of paganism is inherent in Wicca, and that is pre-Christian. That goes back to the very first religious thoughts of man.
So the current Wicca seems to be more related to paganism back then, which is more nature worship kind of a thing?
Absolutely. We say nature worship because we believe that the creative source is in all of nature. And so we wouldn't go out and disrespect our God by throwing trash on the ground. So nature is a very important part to our practice.
So do you think that the historical, that the stereotypical bad part, if you will, of Wiccan practice is really coming from the other side, believing something that wasn't there, that witches were evil and things like this, and that really wasn't.
Look at the history of the Christian church. They originally, you were a heretic if you believed in witches until it became convenient for the Christian church to believe in witches. Then you were a heretic if you did not believe in witches. And it was basically a twofold project by the Christian church. One was to convert as many people as possible, because the early Christian church was an urban religion that was in the main city centers, and everybody out in the sticks were still following the old religious practices or paganism. And that's where the term paganism comes from, which basically meant country bumpkin. It's somebody who lived out in the sticks. And also it was a way to take people's property and just to power over other people. It was a pretty nasty thing that was done. But it was basically, power over others.
Interesting.
I have a question I'd like to ask.
Go for it.
So from what I gather, which I obviously don't know very little about your faith, but it seems like rituals are very important.
Absolutely.
Right. So could you please define what witchcraft is? Are there rituals that you believe will have an effect versus rituals that kind of create community? And you said there's a lot of variance within Wicca. How important are those two aspects of the faith to both you and the, I guess, broader community?
Let me kind of answer that in two different ways. One, from a strictly Wiccan perspective, in that ritual is an integral part of the practice of the religion. If it doesn't contain ritual, then it's not going to be Wicca. It can be something else. But all religious faiths have ritual, whether they acknowledge it or not. Your Baptists have ritual. Sunday service is ritual because you ritually go on Sunday at a specific time. Some of the best Wiccans are started as Catholics because that's a highly ritualistic religion. And many of the practices, like we cleanse our circle with salt, water, fire, and air. They do the same thing in the Christian church. They go around with their censer and their fire and air, and they go around with their holy water, sprinkling it around the church, cleansing it. They're not going to tell you that that is based upon pagan practice, but it certainly is. And, most of your priests are not dumb, and they know that, but it's not something that's told to the masses. Now, witchcraft is a much bigger umbrella. It encompasses a lot, from indigenous practices of people in Africa, South America, voodoo, all kinds of things can be put under the witchcraft label, and they're all basically different. Some are more shamanistic than others. Some are more ritualistic than others. So you have to kind of define specifically what you're talking about.
Define shamanistic.
Shamanistic is an individual that's in touch with and can travel to the spirit realms to bring back information, to bring back enlightenment for the group of people they serve. Your Native American, that was an integral part of their religions, the shamanism.
Why do you think the ritual is important? Why do you think it has meaning?
Anything that's done in repetition brings strength, it brings understanding, and ingrains your religious practice. And it's the same reason that the Catholic Mass is done in the same format time after time after time.
Okay, I'm going to say it again because I'm not sure I understand. I mean, if you do something repeatedly, how does that bring understanding as opposed to just a repetitious act?
Well, one is just from basic experience, from learning the ritual practice better and better and better. And the second is, that's the basic essence of any ritual, is doing it on a continual basis, the same thing over and over in the same way. It embeds and ingrains the spiritual beliefs that's being practiced within the ritual, if that makes any sense.
Maybe. What is the understanding, though, that's being derived? I mean, I can see sort of a sense of group coherence, if you will, when you all get together. It's like singing together. You can sort of feel connected, that sort of thing. But I don't really see a sense of, I'm missing a sense of what exactly is being understood.
Let me speak from my perspective of being in a coven for about 20 years. If you work with a certain group of people and you work with them over a long period of time, you become more attuned to those individuals. You become more attuned to their energy, and you basically just work better together. It's what we call a mature working coven. It's people that's been together 10, 15, 20 years, and things just cook. Your magic works. The things that you do within the circle works. The energy is very strong and very high. Where you take 10 people that have never worked together, it's going to be a completely different scenario. There's other reasons for doing ritual. It's a sacred space. We don't have physical buildings for the most part. There's a few Wiccan or pagan churches scattered around, but not many. Our religious space or our sacred space is wherever we are. So that's what we are creating as a sacred space for our religious practices. Also, we're creating basically a cauldron that our energy will be mixed together and that we can use it for whatever goals that we want to use it for.
Can I ask something? In that you were saying that, you know, when certain groups of people get together, the magic works, like it clicks. Do you mean that literally in the same sort of way as like aspirin works? Like you can reliably, demonstrably show that like that thing has a functional result, or is it more of a faith-based kind of thing than an evidence-based kind of thing?
I can tell you that magic works absolutely, but the question is, how does it work?
Correct.
And the way I'm going to explain it to you and how it works at its most basic level is just, it's a psychological tool. Okay. If you've got 10 people that you know that are working to help you, you're being supported by those 10 people. And if you believe that the magic that they're doing is going to help you, then you're in a better position to actually receive the benefits from that. It's you know, if you're healing somebody and they believe that you're healing them, there's a much better chance that they're actually going to heal. Then on the other side is what I call the oogie boogie stuff that you really just don't know if it works or not. It's the actual magical principles of, you know, working with that energy. And when I teach, I don't say, don't believe this and don't believe that. Go out and try it, have faith, have an open mind, and see how it works for you. But go into it with, you know, a firm commitment that you're going to do it the best that you can do.
Okay. Yeah, that's just hard for me to come at from a very scientific sort of mindset where it's like I need to understand the methodology. I need to understand what the thing is that it's doing. And when you say energy, what does that mean? And, you know, the definitions of things like, well, the magic works. Well, yeah, the magic worked, but you're actually talking about placebo. You're talking about group consciousness. You're talking about the effects of, you know, everybody being in a room and being supportive and good human beings to each other versus magic, right? So I think you can describe all these things in terms that don't rely on a supernatural aspect. And I guess my question would be, why do you feel like people need that component added on to the already satisfactory explanation of how that works?
If it doesn't harm, what's the drawback of doing it?
My immediate answer to that would be it does, because you do have faith healers, you do have people who, you know, you still had to have surgery, right? So yes. It didn't do any harm, but had you believed enough and you left and you went and you decided like, hey, I can hike this mountain because I'm healed, right, and you destroyed your leg and you fall down the mountain and you die, it does demonstrable harm.
Well, you brought up 2 points that's very important to me. One is within anything that's supernatural, especially with healing, where's the bloody profit motive for somebody doing this? One of the worst things about the occult and people that practice these type of things is they're making lots of damn money off of it. Go down to Orange County and look at some of the, you know, there are newspapers down there with all the people that are advertising for healing. It's not cheap. Sure. You want to be a healer and you want to go through Reiki or you want to go through one of those established healing, it's a lot of money. A lot of money. And right there I go, bullshit. They're doing this because they're making money off of it.
Profit motive. Yeah.
The profit motive.
Do you feel that some people maybe don't do things for profit motive, just for fame, for group comfort, for a place of being, that people will play along in a role just because it makes them sort of popular? You know, there's other motivations other than just sort of blood money for the non-belief side,
sure.
right?
I agree with all of that. I've seen people that, you know, they do magic at the drop of a hat, and it's like, you know, you kind of raise your eyebrows, but you have to treat everybody the same. I've never charged for anything metaphysical, for healing work, for divination work, for any of that. I absolutely cut all the profit motive out of anything that I do. When I teach and I train, I don't take a penny for it.
Do you think something being free makes it more real?
No, I just think that I'm not doing it for the wrong reason.
Excellent. Okay. Perfect.
So you mentioned early on when you have your workshops, would that be a fair word to use?
Classes.
Classes? Okay.
Because they run almost an entire year.
Okay. So when you have your classes, you made it clear to your students that they are to take whatever works for them and whatever doesn't.
With some minor exceptions.
Okay, right, with the core tenets.
Right.
Would you say that the effects of ritual, magic, belonging, etc., when some effect is achieved, would you say that being a member of a Wicca coven would be any different than being a member of a club where, as Michael pointed out, everyone is very supportive of you and you now have a ton of confidence when you're achieving an objective and it happens? Would you say that all things being equal, maybe a Wicca, the effects of Wicca would be greater than just the social benefits of being supported by people you love?
The only thing that I would throw into that answer is there is a spiritual or religious aspect to what we do, that we're working with deity, and I think that puts it in a little different category than a club. But no, I don't. In a general sense, I don't think there would be any difference.
Okay.
Other than in a coven, you're kind of working on those things on an ongoing basis, and you have more experience with it. But no, there's a group dynamic that certainly works with any group of people.
Okay, thank you.
Peaches, anything?
This back and forth is actually very fascinating. I do like it, yeah. I've worked with some healers as far as like our group goes. We've had some people that were Catholic that did cleansings and that sort of thing, and a lot of it I think is psychosomatic, for lack of a better term. It made the client feel better, even though we found nothing at this particular location. But we did have an interesting thing happen once where I don't know her actual title, but she's Wiccan, and I assume very high up. And she was doing a little bit of healing on the client, and said that this would make her feel better. She wouldn't be as tense. She wouldn't be, I guess, I hate to use the word freak out, but, she was very, very anxious and, just really susceptible to things in her home. And so she did this little healing on the woman, and suddenly the next day I started feeling stuff. So I called her up and I said, well, what did you do? And she said, because she didn't touch me, she was touching the woman next to me. And I'm not really, I don't take suggestion, and put that into my head. So I called her up and I said, what did you do? And she said, it was supposed to do this, this, and this. Are you having that? I'm like, well, yeah, but I didn't know at the time when she was doing it on this woman that would happen to me. So it was just, physical effects. And she said that was part of the body cleansing. But
What, if you don't mind me asking, what types of physical effects? How extreme can we get here?
In the bathroom quite a bit for one day. And yeah, you could say, oh, it's probably something you ate or maybe stress or whatever. No, this was like something I'd never experienced before. So, and a few other things too, really minor, but without going to see a doctor and having tests done, I don't know. I couldn't explain it.
I have a question for you. Would you say that what you felt was the benefits of what she did or the symptoms of what the person was going through?
It might have been benefits. It didn't feel like those would be any symptoms that she was having. Yeah, it was strange. It was strange. So some stuff like that I experienced, I'm just like, okay, what was that? But it was definitely different.
Could you tell us what exactly this woman was being cleansed of?
Oh gosh. It was about 5 or 6 years ago.
No names. There are HIPAA regulations.
I don't know that that's covered. I don't think you guys have to deal with HIPAA, do you? From a healing point of view, you don't have
In what I do, I would adhere to exactly what HIPAA is. I wouldn't,
just as a privacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we never disclose locations or names unless they allow us to.
Right.
But she thought she had something demonic in her home, and she felt like it was in her and only came out at night. Probably usually when she was sleeping, So, and going with sleep paralysis too, people say, oh, I only experience this stuff at night. Well, one, it's quieter at night. You can hear a lot better at night because there isn't so much ambient noise and that sort of thing. But
can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
With those, how long do you study that person when you're going to sort of determine if they're having sleep paralysis versus actual experiences of some other sort? Do you study them for more than a day or two? Do you have them go have sleep studies done to sort of have a controlled study of what's going on with them at night, or do you guys kind of hang out for the night and that's it?
Usually it's just for the night. But if they do keep complaining of stuff like that, of course we suggest that they have some studies done. I actually consulted with somebody who was on another team who was a sleep tech. And so she would explain, certain things to us too. And I love making those connections because then I can reach out to people and go, hey, we've got this thing going on. What exactly are we supposed to be looking for? What's common? That sort of thing. So, that's always helpful. But unfortunately, in the past, we would have maybe 4 cases back to back on a weekend, and we wouldn't have time to study them for more than a night.
Sure.
As much as I'd like to.
So I have a question I forgot to ask you earlier. You said that oftentimes you truly can't find an explanation for something, and I believe you said something along the lines that you're kind of okay with that. You can't explain something. When is there a criteria that you think you need to meet, or how would you go from saying this activity can't be explained and we don't know what it is, to this activity can't be explained and I believe it might be paranormal?
Another way to put it might be, how do you make it falsifiable?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times we'll say, well, we did have these experiences here and this is how it could be explained. Sometimes I have to just tell them, take it for what it's worth. Maybe we didn't catch evidence of something happening, and we never guarantee, anything. I actually had a client who had us come out. We spent the night. She was upset that we didn't find anything and then wanted her donation back that she gave because we didn't find anything. And so, we can never guarantee anything, just as we can never guarantee that we can remove something either if something does happen to be there.
I'll chime in and say it's awfully nice that you guys do the donation thing, and it's not like, hey, we're just going to come and
yeah.
this thing.
Yeah, we to cover some expenses, and I've heard of people charging $500 to $1,000 for an investigation. That's
and then giving
absurd.
them just whatever result they expect.
Yeah. I mean, you can't be guilted into giving them something either. So
This kind of reminds me of somebody going to a doctor really angry when the doctor doesn't give them a prescription.
or not finding a reason why your stomach hurts or whatever. Yeah. I would like to be able to say that we don't have an explanation. Maybe we can work on these things. A lot of times they won't even listen to that because they're kind of set in their head on what they think it is. But if we aren't able to catch anything, it doesn't mean something is going on or something isn't going on either, because of day of the week, who is present and that sort of thing too. But I don't just automatically say, well, because we can't explain it, it's got to be paranormal. I mean, it's just, depending on what the results are too. If we're getting strange noises, we go to check those out, see if we can, replicate them. Well, if we can't replicate them, they're paranormal now. That sort of thing. So,
how many times has it turned out to be paranormal? Because, most of the examples seem to be sleep paralysis, or we didn't know, or we didn't have an answer, or we don't have a good answer. So how many of those have actually resulted in, yes, this is absolutely, you've got this thing, and we're going to go write this paper, and we're going to show that this is like an amazing discovery in the realm of the paranormal? Like, does that happen, or is it just kind of like we think this might be this thing ish? Like, I don't know how to say it other than
yeah. Well, and when we're going into people's homes, we have to obviously use discretion. We can't cause a panic and that sort of thing either. There have been times when absolutely, we think there's something going on. People are getting grabbed. We've got weird photos, things like that. If we've got the photographic evidence or some audio evidence, you have to kind of take each piece for what it's worth. But if it's all coming together at the same time, something's going on.
Do you have any experience with anything like that being reproducible, happening more than once? Or even trying to reproduce?
For us to be able to reproduce it, usually not. We've been to a handful of places a handful of times. The experience is different each time, but still the same type, of evidence. So we're still getting voices or noises, that we can't explain. But if you're sitting there and you don't hear anything while you're doing an audio recording, and then you play it back seconds later and something's screaming into the mic, I'm going to kill you. We've had that too. So, it's kind of like, wow, all right, yeah, something's going on. There was a place one time, there were 10 of us in a building, nobody else there. We had the only key, so there was no way into the building, and we heard boot steps, outside the room where we were. Every time we'd go out to check it out, nobody was there. As soon as we went back into this little room, started talking, not paying attention to what's going on, the boot steps would start up again.
For things like that, do you guys use like vector mics and things to determine distance from sound, or do you just have like a guy who's there with sound and he creates do you have any way of actually determining location, like source of sounds? Because if you can't reproduce them, I think the most important thing would be to nail that thing down. Like, where is this coming from, right?
If we were able to have that type of equipment in that location, sure. I would love to be able to test that, but
currently it's an after effect mostly.
Yeah, and then also, in certain places, they don't allow us to bring certain equipment, or we can't bring the type of setup that we want that has cords and that sort of thing. So we wouldn't be able to do it in certain places.
Seems inconvenient then.
Well, it just, it depends on the location. Sure. If it's an historical location, they don't want cords like this running around either.
I have a question. In mainstream religion, the question of whether religion is compatible with science, you run into conflicts of opinion when you've got evidence that really literally conflicts opinions, that conflicts with evidence. Gary, this is kind of directed to you primarily, but do you see that there are any elements of what science teaches us that conflicts with what Wiccan practice believes or practices?
I don't think there's anything that's, science doesn't, overrule my religious beliefs, because they are religious beliefs. But I'm also going to add is, the more we as a human culture move forward and the more information that we get, the more that we understand. And, we've just gone through, the basic understandings of quantum physics, and that's raised so many questions. And, you could look at that and say, there could be a lot of paranormal basis with quantum physics, because they don't seem to adhere to the rules that we've thought for a long time were established. So I think the more we go, the more you're going to be able to use science to understand some of the things that we don't understand today.
Sorry, does it worry you that every time that's happened throughout the past, that it's never been religion that teaches science, that it's always science that sort of explains the concept from the religion? I mean, going forward, like those have historically always been incompatible results. As you do research and you find out sort of how things work, they tend to always be non-magical results, right? We can kind of do the math, we can put this stuff together and show physically how this thing occurs. Do you feel like there's a place for religion to teach sort of science things? Because you use the metaphysical term, and so I was curious if that's sort of...
No, I don't think I'd put them in those terms. I think I would tell you that my religious faith comes from here, and my scientific belief comes from here, and they're not exactly the same thing. And what establishes my belief in what we're talking about tonight, the supernatural, is my direct experience with it, and what I've felt and what I've gone through. We talk about energy, okay? We talk about healing energy. We talk about different types of energy. It's something that we work with within the craft, and that is not scientifically provable today. Maybe it will be in the future, but everything that exists is just energy in a different form, and we don't really understand it all that well. And the more that we learn, the things we thought were absolute truths are coming into question.
To a degree, yeah. I would say if you talk to people like Sean Carroll, he would disagree with you that we don't understand energy. I think he very much understands energy. They understand quantum mechanics. They understand quantum physics very, very well. There are a lot of things they don't understand. But I don't think that leads to an automatic assumption that if they can't explain it, ergo, woo. I think it's just you kind of have to say, we can't explain that, so we don't have an answer. So I would be curious how you make the jump from, I don't know if that's demonstrably true, to I am convinced that that's true.
Because that comes from the heart rather than the head.
Got it. More of a philosophical field.
And to me, it's irrelevant.
Okay.
It's, I can feel energy, I can direct energy, but I'm not going to try to change your mind where you don't believe it's true. Okay. It's because of my personal experience in doing it.
I want to balance this a little bit, because I think that's a little bit overstated, that we, and I've listened to Sean Carroll a little bit, I haven't read all his books, I've only read one, that I would disagree that at this point we understand quantum physics quite to the point that you're describing.
Pretty well. There's a lot of things that are unknown. There's stuff we don't get, but it's not the Deepak Chopra-ish wooey kind of like, we don't know, so anything's possible.
Right. That's the other piece.
The questions in quantum mechanics don't say anything could happen. That's not. Right. That's not the.
Yeah, and I won't go deeper than that because I don't know it. I don't understand it better. But it feels overstated to me. But then the other half of that is that I do see the believer side, and this is not a Wiccan thing in particular. Sort of jumping into the gap, if you will, of vagueness. I mean, Richard Feynman is really one of the strongest scientists who tells us that, and granted this was 60 years ago, but that if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. And people on the believer side tend to sort of jump into that gap. And Deepak Chopra is a good example, and try to put explanations into there, which is okay, but it's the level of confidence that they have in those explanations that seems very inappropriate.
I'm certainly not trying to say quantum mechanics is an explanation for things. Yeah. What I'm saying is it's raising questions to our preconceived beliefs before the time that we started to understand quantum mechanics. Sure. Yeah, and who knows where it's going to go.
Yeah, it's a growing body of knowledge for sure, always, right? Like that's what's so nice about the scientific methods and principles, is that you do work forward, that you do correct yourself. It's a sort of self-correcting mechanism, right? That the knowledge of what is true is more important than what you'd like to be true. So you move forward in that progression of determining that truth. I think that's absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a hit to us when we learned from Einstein that the world at some level does not really operate in the way we intuit it should. So when you talk about coming from the heart, to me that means coming from our intuitions of how things should work. And here we have something like, well, time is not equal. Well, I've got a low battery signal. We're going to take okay, so that's pretty much the end of that point. We're just going to take a minute to change batteries, and then we'll come back.
Okay. So I have a question for you, Gary. So you've made it very clear that your beliefs stem mostly from your personal experience. So when you got started in Wicca, how long was it before you had an experience that convinced you that this philosophy is worth pursuing? And before you had any experiences like that, what attracted you and kept you in Wicca?
Well, that's a little bit of a story, and it's a little humorous. If you want me to tell it, I will. I got into all of this for all the wrong reasons.
Okay.
All the wrong reasons. I had been in a marriage for 12 years, and the marriage was failing. And I hadn't been out in circulation with the ladies for quite some time. So I'm thinking of, I need a trick. I need something to meet ladies with. So I go, tarot cards. What a wonderful idea. I'll take those cards and I'll meet women in bars and I'll do readings for them and I'll learn all sorts of stuff about them. That never actually occurred. But as I started working with these cards, I started seeing things coming through those, and it really piqued my interest, and I really started studying them. And from that, this was back in the time where all the crystal shops were around. There was one on every corner.
Yeah.
I went out to one of the shops out in Corona, and there was a bulletin board on the back wall. It said Wicca classes. And I just thought it might be interesting, and I took it. And it really touched a vein with me. It spoke to me and my beliefs in what was presented, and that's what got me into it. Really what got me into it was wanting to get laid.
Okay. That's awesome.
I just got the audio cue of like, where are all the Wiccan women at? Like in my head, Mel Brooks style.
What is the name of the shop in Idlewild? Is the sisters? I can't remember. There's two words there.
Well, I got into paranormal investigating because I wanted to contact my dead parakeet.
Nice.
My parakeet passed away. I had one of those little shoebox recorders, so I set it out, pressed record, and started asking a bunch of questions to see if I could hear my parakeet. I also set out a piece of paper, asked for it to poop on it in case my parakeet was there, and I got nothing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure the
still-
second
But
one.
that was my first experience in trying to contact the other side.
Okay, I have a question for this side, for both you guys. How much of us is spiritual? Is there a spiritual element to us?
I feel like that's tricky language.
Well, define the word to you then.
For me, I don't know. I think it's a very ill-defined word.
It is, and that's why I asked you to
sort of
define
have
it.
a problem with it just being very nailed down, because anybody you ask, spiritualism is a different thing to them. So if you mean the sort of like spirit, like there's a thing in us that leaves us when we die.
Okay, let me clarify a little bit. It's not my favorite word either because of that exact reason, because people define it differently. So you define it.
If you mean that
and then
people are naturally ritualistic, that they need group, that they need camaraderie, that they need some sort of thing to do, I totally think that's a part of our nature. That's just where we evolved from. We were social creatures. That's just how we got here. I think when he says, that's a functional thing of Wicca is the group mentality, the getting together, the camaraderie component. I think that's very important to us as animals, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't mean anything by it. I mean, You define the word.
Sure.
What does the word mean to you, and then what do you think, Adrian?
So I have the same problem. I have the same problem with the word, but I think that the spiritualism and this kind of group cohesion that we're talking about, It's very powerful, obviously, for a lot of people, but I think it's just another. I think it's on the spectrum of human emotion, right? So, in the same way that, like, I might chuckle when I hear like a stupid joke, or I'll be laughing out loud at a comedy show, right? There's a spectrum of what we find funny, and I think there's a spectrum of a way that we feel close to people, right? So like I love my friend, but then I love my brother in a different way, and so I just think it's a different kind of emotional experience that's just on the very, very high end of the spectrum.
So I'm not getting a sense that there's a connection to something otherworldly at all.
No.
From what you guys are saying.
No, not really. I would say that we are pattern-seeking animals. We look for answers. We like to have bad answers better than no answers, and I think that's just sort of how our brain works. And when we can have something that is a convincing answer in any respect that's not a non-answer, we will tend to take that over just saying, I don't know, because that's a scary thing. It's evolutionarily, it's more beneficial to assume that rustling behind the bush is a tiger and you run and you don't get eaten than to not think it's anything and get eaten and not learn that it was a tiger, right? So I think those kinds of things sort of carry along.
So it kind of reminds me then, in terms of what your work is, Peaches, I mean, are people really unsatisfied when they don't get an answer? Or do they continue to seek? If you have a result that it is negative, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit before, but do they double down? Did you see that more often than not, or does it just convince them that it's okay, maybe there is nothing there?
I don't think it convinces them that nothing's there because they still believe in it, that it's possible. But we have gone out to locations several times, just because they would complain that the same thing keeps happening. So we have visited locations for that. But a lot of the times the so-called activity dies down after we've been there, probably because we've given them, some sort of comforting notion that their house is not full of a bunch of demons and, is the portal to hell underneath their house. Yep. So whether we could actually, test for that, I'm not really sure. But
so exactly how much do you charge to get rid of a portal from hell in the back here?
No guarantees.
For donation.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go for it.
I have a question for both of you. You're both coming from an atheist background, right? Correct?
I come from a very Christian background.
Oh, I mean, at the discussion tonight,
Most recently,
your
from
perspective.
here, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
And here's the reason I'm asking this question is I've found that not all, probably not many, but there are atheists that are absolutely as evangelical as any Christian out there, and that atheism for them is a religion, that it's their religion.
Sure.
Okay. What the question I have for you is, from your background, you see no social benefit or rationale for people being involved in any belief in a higher power or religious practice?
The social benefits there. We do it as well, right? There's the Sunday assembly events. That's a great example of people who came out of a belief, who had that social background, who had that support structure sort of ripped out from underneath them, because once you say, I don't believe in your story, you don't get to be part of the club anymore. So you have to go. And that's, like you said, someone who's used to ritual, who needs that Sunday morning thing, that Wednesday night thing, the choir practice, they need somewhere to go. And often that's a lacking thing in this community. So they're trying to do some things like that to garner that. But it's because we can show studies that show how we benefit from that component. So yeah, I think there's a huge good piece to it.
Right. Yeah. The just at UCR, for example, the largest, most successful, longest lasting organizations on campus are typically Christian organizations. They've got at least 50 members consistently. Their meetings are huge. They go to, I don't know I wouldn't call them rallies, things like Harvest, or
Mm-hmm.
what do you call that?
Oh, rally.
Rally?
Sure.
Yeah.
Revival, whatever you got,
yeah,
sure.
revival type things, and then they're very important for everyone. Like especially when someone's in college and they're gone from home, right? But even more so, like I told you guys, parts of my family are very traditional Catholics. Like if you, it happens all over the place, but especially when I see it in Mexico. Every Sunday, everyone goes to church in this beautiful cathedral-looking building, and you'll see 3 or 4 generations of people there, right? You'll see great-grandparents with their 2-year-old great-grandchildren on their lap, and it's beautiful to see when communities come together like that. And although I don't believe in the spiritual things that are going on, I don't believe in the creation stories. When I go to church and it's not like a super boring sermon, I get a happy feeling when I see people experiencing that together.
Thank you.
Well, that kind of brings up the question of, if a belief is false, but it has a positive social element to it, does that justify it? Is that something we should encourage? I mean, there's a question of Richard Dawkins mentions things like, to him, truth is important. And he kind of, to some degree, tries to ram that down people's throats. But there may be a positive element. Now, granted, in some religions, there are huge negatives to counterbalance that. So to what degree might the positive results of religious practices be valuable to enough to justify false beliefs?
Well, you have to come to an agreement on what a false belief is, and that's going to be pretty difficult because the people that believe that are not going to agree that it's a false belief.
So that doesn't.
It's kind of like Trump saying he had 1 million people at his inauguration. You're not going to change his belief when it's, everybody knows from the evidence that he didn't.
So within the person who's making the judgment, nobody really goes that way, because if they believe it's false, they will not do it. So essentially, you're saying by definition, they believe these things are true. And does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
But we know certain things are untrue. For example, the Earth is not flat, and yet people would believe this.
People still believe it today.
Right, exactly. So now, if there was some positive social value to that, should we in society allow that to still happen? That's kind of a bad analogy because there's not a positive element to flat Earth, but you get the point at least.
If it's not harming anybody else, I don't see why that belief should be legislated. Just let them believe whatever they want to believe.
Yeah.
If it's not hurting you or anybody else, what's the big deal?
I think that depending on the belief, the problem isn't the belief. It's that. So if we can take something simple like flat Earth, right, and it can get beliefs can get as complicated as we want them to be. But if you take something as simple as that, the problem is that they didn't. Sorry, they didn't seek out the right information, or they fell for the wrong information, and so I think the problem is just maybe critical thinking skills or an ignorance of what sources are trustworthy and which are not. So I think that's what the problem would be. Even if a belief has a positive effect, it wouldn't have been. If an incorrect belief had a positive effect, it would have been reached if the proper channels were taken to come to a conclusion.
Yeah, it's almost a philosophical concept of, if you murdered somebody that was going to murder 5,000 people and you stopped that from happening, would that be an okay thing to do? Like it almost walks into that sort of thing. And I think what is true is probably the most important thing we can know. It's otherwise. First of all, I love your shirt, fantastic. But if we want to resolve issues like that, if we're coming from a fundamental functional misunderstanding or misagreement on how the world works at a fundamental level, we'll never get there. Because if you think you're going to walk with me in heaven one day, and you think that we're all going to burn in hell, and you think that there's no such thing, and you think that we're all going to be ghosts and living on the earth after we're gone, we're not going to agree on how to get through life and what's important for the future. So I think knowing if those things are true or false beliefs are highly important. And if you're getting to a good place on a bad belief, I don't feel like that's a good net result, because you are now, I would say, compromising your rational thinking skills, your logic, your ability to work through what's true and not true, and that would affect you in other ways. I don't want my bus driver to believe in Jesus take the wheel, right? Now, that might be their belief, and it might do nobody any harm until they let go, right? And that's where it's sort of that does nobody any harm until. And I just think it sort of puts you in a bad mind space if you're willing to say, it doesn't matter if this is true or not because it makes someone happy. I think it's more important to be unhappy and accurate than happy and, inaccurate.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be associated with the supernatural or religion or anything
Absolutely
else.
not, no.
I mean, there's,
No, it
there's
could be to do with should you wash your hands or not, right? I mean, that has a huge effect on people. But you start to get in the conversation of, are we talking about belief or are we talking about knowledge? And I think, when you start to have that discussion and you start to break those two apart, we've been talking about belief for the most part. We have not been making claims of knowledge, right? And so when you start to make claims of, I know this thing works because, now you've got yourself into a little bit higher level of having to demonstrate that thing to be true than I just believe this and that's my right, right? Which I do agree with. I think it's 100% everybody's right in here to believe exactly whatever they want to believe, and whether I do or not, I will fight tooth and nail for you to be able to have that belief. So,
well, and going back to the flat
that.
Earth too, and what you just said, I kind of wonder if people do think that just out of defiance,
right.
Because they can.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But then it's a question of are they actually convinced, right? Because now you're playing a game, right? If you're not
right.
actually convinced of something, then you're doing yourself a disservice, I think.
Right.
One of the things that I teach in my classes is that a belief is something you've been told or you've been exposed to that seems to work for you, and you have a belief in it, and it works really well in a religious framework. You believe there was a Jesus Christ, you believe whatever. Knowledge is your personal firsthand experience with that, and whether you've had an experience with that belief, but that's still not truth, because truth is variable for a lot of different people.
Yeah, and I will kind of reinforce something you said, that I think what's a differentiation, if you will, would be where there is harm, and people can disagree on where there's harm, but I think that's where the debate has to be. We're going to have one of our future panels here is going to be on the conflict issues, such as LGBT discrimination, for example. So
one of the fundamental core beliefs of Wicca is all religions are equally valid, except when it comes to the point where they say they're the one and only true way. At that point, no, you're not valid.
Equally valid, but not necessarily equally true.
Equally valid for the people that participate
for the individual
in it.
who holds the opinion.
I have no animosity against Christians or Islam or anyone else. If it works for them, that's great. Wicca doesn't proselytize.
But do you believe their claims are as equally true?
For them, sure.
Well, I don't understand that, because to me that's an illogical thing to say, because something is either true or not true. Just functionally, things aren't necessarily true or false. Like, we could get into some deep laws of logic crap, but it's either true or not true. And I can say this statement is either true or not true, right? And I think we would all agree that that's the case. So when someone says Jesus lived, died, rose again, is a son of a God who created the world, is that true or not true? Right? I don't think it's true for you, because that's not how reality works. Like gravity isn't true for you. It's true for everybody. And so I'd be curious how you work out that if it's true for them part.
I think this is a matter of semantics.
Okay.
If I use the word true, it's not in a scientific, repeatable, provable sense.
Okay.
It's in a person's firm conviction of their belief system.
So if it works for them.
It's their personal truth.
Okay.
Because, when you have a deep spiritual belief in something, you really don't want to hear anything that tries to disprove what your belief is.
Okay. Yeah, because I would define knowledge as justified true belief, right? And so that, to me, it inherently defines that there has to be a true or not true component to it, right? And to me, that's the sort of important part.
Yeah, the works for me thing seems to be a better definition than true. I think the word truth is a little bit stretched, but if somebody had psychic surgery, right, and it works for them, they feel better, they believe it really worked, that is what I would use the word valid in your opinion to them. They walk off happy, comfortable. They may go get their chemotherapy in 6 months, but they're happy with it. But it doesn't make it true. So I find the use of the word truth a little overused.
Yeah, I think it's
So.
just semantics.
Yeah, but I think it's an important semantic.
Right.
Because I run into lots of people who believe things that are literally untrue. Try like a flat earther out of. It's just amazing. Anyways, we're going to leave it at that for now. Thank you for watching this. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and for those in the room, we're going to have some Q&A. Check us out on Facebook. We've got a Facebook group. You'll learn about the upcoming events. I'll give you a little bit of a quick rundown on the next ones that are coming up. Micro versus macro evolution is next. And then we get into the role of philosophy. And after that, we're going to deal with the argument of you can't know because you weren't there by looking at the methodology of historical science. So check those things out, and let's take a 10-minute break. Thanks.